So All About Women is a fantastic festival that takes place annually at the Opera House, and even though its name is All About Women, it does extend beyond any binary notions of gender, an opportunity to bring together big speakers with challenging ideas to diverse audiences.
I go through the full gamut of emotions when I'm at this festival, everything from joy and laughter to genuine anger and frustration. I always learn something.
Without exception, the debates, the discussions, the guests, the Q&As, the kinds of thinking and topics and insights that you get at All About Women are quite amazing.
Our approach to programming All About Women is not to go at it with this predetermined list of ideas. It's rather to listen to the conversations that are happening out there, to find out what people find urgent, what they find important, what they think is necessary right now. And this year, teaming up with curators like Jamila Rizvi, Amy Thunig, and Caro, we had instant access to a diversity of ideas. And that's basically how we go about it. We start with what those conversations are, and then we find the people we need to hear from to speak to those ideas.
It's an opportunity for conversations. It's an opportunity for robust discussion, and it's just a really wonderful time to come together in the city and hear from some of the greatest speakers, thinkers, and leaders, really, not only here in Australia, but globally.
All About Women is my favourite festival on the Australian calendar. It is a genuine celebration of what women are doing in this country, what women are thinking about, and what women are talking about, and what is on the agenda for gender equality. I think my favourite thing about it is I never know quite what I'm going to get.
And I always find it exciting, glamorous. I love that it's at the Sydney Opera House. I mean, so many things you do for worthy causes, and of course the rights and equality of women is about the worthiest cause there is, are done on a shoestring and are always kind of, in the back of rundown halls and that kind of stuff. So, this is just so awesome because it's so glamorous and fabulous. And women flock to this.
It was such a privilege and an honour to be invited to be a co-curator for the 2023 All About Women Festival. I think to begin with, I was overwhelmed because I was so excited, and there was no shortage of people that I could think of that I wanted to bring together. As an actually autistic person myself, who is also an academic and also an Indigenous person and also identifies as queer, I was thinking about what are some of the challenges that I have in my life, and I was thinking about how I know for me when it came to being autistic and also being disabled in general, how I felt like I needed to attain and access certain privilege before I could risk sharing that part of my identity. And so I started thinking about, if I was bringing a conversation together, could we actually bring together a panel of actually autistic people who could speak to lived experience, but also what does the research say? Do we have researchers in this field who themselves are actually autistic? Could we discuss those of us who would be labelled high functioning when in fact we're high masking? What would it look like if we got together and we were in control of that conversation? And I'm so excited that we're able to bring that together. We've got Chloé Hayden, who does a phenomenal job representing the character Quinny on Heartbreak High. We have my dear friend and my former colleague, Dr. Jack Den Howding, whose TED Talk is not to be missed. And we have Tame, who is an amazing survivor advocate leading the Tame Foundation. Among the four of us, we've got 3 TED Talks, 3 published books, but we live with significant challenges. And that's what we're going to be talking about. On the topic of acting, and particularly because like my oldest child is currently dreaming of growing up to be an actor, and that is given time sensitivity when it comes to creating films and things like that, so important. The budgets, everything like that. Like, you've got to be on time, things have to be a certain way. And that would have been a job that I would have thought would be really hard for autistic people. But Chloé, you are smashing it as Quinny and giving us representation. Like, there's a date scene, if you haven't seen it yet, where Quinny goes on their first date with this awesome, I believe, a woman identifying character. And I watched it, I cried, because I'd never seen the inside of my brain represented on television before. And you act it so beautifully, it's written so beautifully. What's it like being an actor? Like, what kind of supports do you ask for? How do you find the team with that? Like, and maybe not just to target Heartbreak High, but, you know, this experience as a writer, as an actor, as someone who's absolutely smashing it. How do you do it?
You know, there's a lot of people in the industry who make films who think that autistic people shouldn't be in the industry. Similarly to what you said, because it feels like an industry that would be very against us, and that is very a lot to take on. Certain singers in particular who wrote certain movies. Anyway, but I've always thought that autistic people belong in the entertainment industry. Like, we've had to act our entire lives for free.
You know, I sat on that question. I wanted to ask you this on stage, and then I was worried it would be rude, but I've always wondered, is acting just like, because masking?
Do you know what?
Feels like
it's
acting.
so easy, because growing up, like, acting is a hard job. It is a real job, but it's like, here's the thing. Growing up, even long before I was diagnosed, I used to look to my favorite characters and humans and YouTubers, and because I knew that my own personality and my own mind wasn't something that the world wanted, I would just become people that I knew people did like. And I became these people so well that I would have people be like, has anyone ever told you that you're exactly like so-and-so? And I was like, yes, because that is exactly what I am trying to do. Like, I never had official training, because my life was my official training. So we're designed for this industry, and I would say an easy 85% of this industry is closeted neurodivergent. Like, easily. You know, I diagnose everyone on every set that I'm on. But, and again, similarly to life and society in general, I think what disables us in the entertainment industry is the industry and its refusal and lack of inclusivity. And when I did Heartbreak, I've been on a lot of jobs before which didn't hire me or would fire me because of being autistic, and literally not because of accessibility needs, simply because the word was scary for them.
Yeah.
And when I got Heartbreak, at this point, Sia's movie had just come out, so I had been talking about it a lot on TikTok, and so they hired me knowing that I had very, very fiery thoughts about autistic people in the film industry, and they still hired me. I don't know why, but they did. And the first thing that happened as soon as I got the job, I immediately had calls with the creators and the writers and the directors being like, how can we best accommodate you? And it was that easy. And the accommodations that I asked for didn't cost them any extra money, didn't add any extra time, didn't cause any issues, didn't make it more difficult for anyone. And every other cast member said that because of the accommodations that they gave me, it like waterfall down onto everyone else, and every single person got the accommodations that they asked for too, because it's that easy to accommodate people. And autistic people are a goddamn asset to your set.
Yeah, well said.
Here we are 30 years later since the founding of Bikini Kill, and all of a sudden the band finds its message newly relevant. In fact, they're drawing audiences bigger than they ever experienced in the 90s. What's the reason? Think about it. 2016, Donald Trump emerges on the scene. He emerged in that presidential campaign with some pretty grotesque comments about female bodies and about women's rights. And think about the other thing that's been happening over the past 5 years. We've had the Me Too movement, women coming forward and claiming their space and telling their story. All of a sudden, there's a new surge of feminism happening out there, and Bikini Kill is not only reaching to a nostalgic audience that wants to think back to the 90s, they're finding a new audience of younger women who know that girls had better come to the front.
I find it kind of interesting attempts sometimes of people shifting the meaning of punk, like someone like John Lydon from the Sex Pistols claims that, I'm sorry, that I know, but he claims that, to be punk is to be anti-authoritarian, which he uses as a way to justify him supporting someone like Trump. Do you think that there is an appropriation of the term punk for that reason? People are trying to appropriate it?
It's just interesting that he would say that supporting Trump is anti-authoritarian.
I know, it makes no sense.
Logically incoherent.
Because I guess Trump was seen as like thumbing his nose at the quote-unquote establishment.
But he's
just
like, let's not.
We won't
I
down that.
can't
It's too
go there.
He's not invited to the party.
Yeah, he's not invited to this party.
Or John Lydon.
I mean, I always thought of punk not like as a genre of music, but I thought of it as, you know, people getting together to make culture separate from corporations who are like, we're going to make the stuff that we want to make. And it doesn't have to sound in a certain way. Like when I was in high school, I went to shows of like Coercion and Conformity and stuff, and Exploited and stuff like that. And like the guys would like spit on the audience. And I was just like, man, it's hard enough to be a girl in this audience already, but then I'm going to like pay $5 and have a fake ID and get spit on. Like I just spit on my, I was trying to make my point like in 3D. But you know, then I moved to Olympia where I met Kathy, and there was K Records was there, and the music was much more kind of like, I don't want to say amateurish in a bad way, but I want to say like it was kind of this much more like kind of like goofy, childlike, and in a way traditionally feminine style of making music that was like not professional and that wasn't about spitting on people and that was about graciousness and community. And so I was like, wow, you could have this, you know, I started to question the macho-ness in a lot of punk and the aggressiveness that was like stupid. I love aggressiveness, but this one kind of aggressiveness that was like not for any point. You know what I mean? Like I felt like seeing other people speaking back to power can be really great. And I think there's that part in like English punk, early English punk.
Is that also with the aggressiveness that you mentioned before, like spitting on the audience? There's different kinds. There's hostility towards the people who have paid money to see you or within the, I guess, the pit or whatever. But then there's a political aggression which comes through the music. That's a delineation there, right?
Yeah, I think one of the really strange things and we were talking about this backstage the other night, one of the strange things that's happened since our 20s to now is that like when we first started performing, we were performing largely for audiences of like cis, straight, white men. And there'd be like, you know, maybe 3 women there. And a lot of our shows did feel like battles. And so there were a lot of songs that were like, we don't need you, and you know, we don't care what you think about us, and stuff like that. And then now when we sing them, they almost have a different meaning, and I've been changing some of the lyrics. Like there's this one song, This Is Not a Test, and I'm like, you're dumb, I'm not. And I mean, what a great lyric, right? You're dumb, I'm not. And then it goes, you're fucked, I'm not. But anyways, I've started to say they're fucked, we're not, because now we're looking out and we're seeing audiences who are super supportive. We're not having, you know, a guy spit a beer in my face while I'm trying to sing. I'm not having, you know, this kind of violence or people telling me to shut up. We still do have harassment issues at our shows. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like, there's been stuff that happened in the States that was really, really messed up, and still goes on. But yeah, that's been an interesting transition to, you know, be singing these songs that were written in a certain context, and they still have that same meaning, and I still have the same feeling behind them, but it's for a different audience.
I was a child of the body positivity movement. I was very much a kid who was growing up, going through puberty, high school, when we were being told that body positivity was taking over from the sort of stick-thin models that we'd seen on catwalks and in magazines before that. But the thing is, body positivity, while it was a great idea and a great concept, comes with a lot of pressure. Like, do you have to love your body? Can't you just sort of be neutral about it? Can't you just, you know, sort of see it as a vehicle to get you around, but it doesn't perhaps need to be more than that? Do you have to love it? And more than that, now that the idea of body positivity has been commercialized and corporatized and packaged up and marketed to us, is it the kind of grassroots movement that it used to be, or is it just another sales pitch? So in this session, what I've asked our incredible panel of guests to do is to bring their perspective on why they feel left out, even by the body positivity movement. So we've got this movement that was supposed to be all-inclusive and mean that we all loved our bodies. But there are still a whole lot of people whose bodies exist on the margins who feel like they don't have access to that conversation.
I too wanted to be a black supermodel. And that was only because I saw Naomi Campbell and Veronica Webb on the catwalks just strutting, taking up this white space, predominantly white space. And then coming to Australia, there was a lack of representation. And then entering into the modelling industry, where once again, I'm trying to fit this Eurocentric ideal of beauty, finding myself in a plastic surgeon's office, wanting to alter how I look, wearing contact lenses and straightening and bleaching my hair. And then I get to this point where I think that sovereignty of self is like really screaming out, and I want to take control of who I am and my body. I want to liberate this black body. And I thought I could be like a change to this issue of the lack of diversity and inclusion in Australian publications, beauty and media, by launching Ascension, ultimately a first of its kind, celebrating women of colour, to reinsert them back into fashion and media, to give them a voice and to define beauty on our terms. So having gone through being a model and then a magazine editor, getting to this point where I think all of us in some way understand how the machine works, and once we understand how the machine works, it's a billion-dollar industry that is always keeping us self-loathing, trying to keep up with the Kardashians. There's always something that we're not enough, we're never enough. And it got to the point where that's where the decolonizing of beauty came to me. Looking at, as a black woman with my black body, I'm never gonna survive in these industries. So for me to go back and reclaim my sovereignty by indigenizing beauty, by stepping out and looking at the women who came before me, there was no colonization, there was no patriarchy, there was no capitalism, and that's where Jaguru comes into it. And that's the title of my book. Reclaiming the language that was taken from me, Jaguru is my beauty. And Jaguru means beauty or beautiful in Jitterbal, which is my grandmother's language. So being able to reclaim that, going back and learning the stories of my matriarchs, what made them staunch, what made them Jaguru, the culture, the creation stories that showed me that the essence of me and the women who make up my community, they show and reflect Jaguru, the wisdom that is passed down from my matriarchs. And so that's how I decolonize beauty, by indigenizing it, stepping away from this Western framework, looking through the eyes of being aesthetically pleasing to what does my spirit want? Where does it need to be? And it needs to be back where it all started and began, and that was 60,000 years ago. So that's how I've saved my black body and liberated that in a space where I'm never gonna be accepted for who I am.
Yes, 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 yes.
I get to sit up here with these people. It's incredible, and I think that we can all learn something from how listening to what you just said made us feel. So, Ellie.
Yeah,
let's
hello.
chat. Disabled people are also largely excluded from the #BooBoo movement. For people with disabilities, the expectations aren't inclusive or realistic. So,
let's be real. I hate the body positivity movement. I'm putting it out there. It is broken. Because, first of all, positive or not, it reinforces the idea that we should be concentrating on only our bodies and not our character, our values, our skills, everything we have to bring. So the movement's broken. It sets completely unrealistic expectations for people with disability. There is a narrative in the body positivity movement which is, don't worry about the stretch marks on your legs or on your stomach, because you can run around with the grandkids, you can pick them up, you can play, your body is strong, so don't worry about how it looks. Well, how do you think that goes down in the ears of people with disability who can't pick up their grandkids? Their body isn't physically strong. It's actually not a positive message at all. What you're saying is our bodies are actually worthless. worthless. And so we keep being told, oh, well, you've got a wheelchair in the body positivity ad, so you've been included. But the message really is what's the important bit, and the message is so divisive. And the other thing that this movement brings that frustrates me so much is we're up here sitting and talking about our bodies and comments that people have no fucking right to make. Yeah. And instead, we should be out combating the fact that 40% of women with disabilities will suffer from domestic violence, double those without disability. We should be fighting the fact that 90% of women with intellectual disabilities, 90% will be sexually abused in their lifetime. We need to spend less time worrying about this issue and more time worrying about this real structural issues holding women back. And the body positivity movement doesn't help. It's simply the comments that I hear that you get and Denny that you received. I just think, who thinks they have the right to say that to another human being? It is that simple. You do not have the right to say those words to another human being. Go away.
Yeah.
Woo!
When I was asked to be a co-curator, I was thrilled, delighted, and of course immediately hit with a major slap of imposter syndrome. But mind you, everyone who's a decent human being thinks they're an imposter. So maybe I'm a decent human being and an imposter. But I was delighted. It also made me think. It made me think, well, what are the issues? What are the things? And who are the people that I want to see talking about those particular topics and those particular issues? And that's such a privilege to actually get to do that kind of thinking and have the ability to get the people you want to come and sit in a room and talk about it. One of the reasons that I decided that the war on women was a topic that we should discuss is I have been paying particular attention ever since 2017 and the #MeToo phenomenon, where hundreds of millions of women all around the world shared their stories of sexual abuse, harassment, assault, etc. I've been watching how the backlash has grown in intensity, and quite frankly, it's incredibly aggressive and very scary. And I've seen it happening all over the world, obviously. I mean, there are clear places where women's lives are going backwards so fast that it's absolutely terrifying and chilling, like Afghanistan under the Taliban. And then there are areas of real hope, like the women in Iran who are actually fighting back against the war on women with enormous courage and with many great male allies. I think when you're in a kind of a war, one of the things you have to do to make sure you don't lose your freedoms, so you continue to get more freedoms, more rights, more equality, not less and less and less, is you have to band together. You have to work together, and you have to be aware that your rights are being stripped away from you. We have to continue to point the finger when rights are being taken away. Point it out. Point out how damaging it is. Point out what it will do to the lives of women and girls, the future of women and girls. Because that kind of glaring injustice does motivate people who might not otherwise think about it, including lots and lots of men of goodwill. So our job, in a way, is as a gender, as feminists, as activists, to ring the clarion bell and say this is an emergency, and every step they take that pushes us further back, that we allow to happen without protest, gives them permission to do more, and we must not give them that permission.
I would like to add to the definition of violence, impoverishment. I mean, I've learned from my black friends in the United States to say under-resourced and impoverished, so that we can see where it's coming from. Because, you know, for the longest time I would say poor, right? But that, like, where does that come from to say someone is poor, right? They didn't just it's as if this thing descended. But when you say under-resourced and impoverished and others, where you show where the actual violence comes from, and that is the systems at play, and that is the state, then you show clearly where the violence is coming from, because that is violence. Poverty is violence. And we have to recognize that, and it plays in directly into things like intimate partner violence and domestic violence, because of all the things that a woman has to take into account before she can leave, if she can leave. And it was obviously at the heart of so much of the suffering that happened during lockdown, because of, again, who was under-resourced and who had the ability to do anything, and without mutual aid and community and all those other great anarchist principles. So I think it's important to that in our definition of violence, that we have that violence where people are deliberately kept under-resourced and impoverished as a way to keep them down. And this is where reproductive justice becomes an issue, not just reproductive rights. Because, and I know because I heard from my Aboriginal friends on the panel earlier, that yes, abortion is an important right to have, but it's also an important right, as Dr. Loretta Ross and other black feminists who coined the phrase reproductive justice have told us. It's also important to be able to choose to have children when you want them to lead dignified lives, to feed those children, to send them to school, and to know that they're going to come home from school and not be murdered by someone who's supposed to protect them.
So Chelsea,
yeah, I mean, I struggle with some of the conversations about, unpaid care and the burden of care, because, in black fellas, like, the importance of family and the social value of caring, like, it's the most important role that we could have. And I think about, we're talking about, who gets to be carers and seen and not stigmatised. And I think about, I have my first child, first of 5, at 22, and they're all quite young together, and I live in a poor neighbourhood, and the reading of my body and my supposed lack of control over my reproductive choices, and the way in which, if I was shopping during the middle of the day with 5 little ones and people counting and staring and being offended by my presence, of how dare I breed. I remember going to see a GP, and after I was GP when I was sick, and he asked me how many children I had, and he said, "Stop polluting the earth." And so, there is this, we can talk about single mothers and care and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. The reality is there are people who are deemed undeserving of being carers, and that it's not in itself just an important life role to bring in life and raise children, and that alone should be still celebrated and valued, as though somehow choosing to be a parent is a problem. Because you haven't pursued a particular career. And so I struggle sometimes in the context of, thinking about class and care, because there is, in a Western construct, the sort of monetisation around care, and not understanding what it is to be human is to care.
Yes.
And yeah.
And you're quite right, it does need a complete reorientation. And at the most recent Early Years Summit, I was really struck by the number of leading women from First Nations communities who pointed out, if we need to talk about the early years, we've got 60,000 years of parenting and kinship, that expertise that we should be drawing on, and not have these things happen that you've shared with us. That's available to us, we choose not to.
And the thing is, we've got so many, we've got increasing rates of Indigenous children in care. It's connected to poverty. So why aren't we better supporting families to keep children in care, as opposed to punishing families for being poor? And the kids that are getting incarcerated is because of poverty, the factors that make them unable to be eligible for bail. That's and right. So it's all connected.
Goodbye Girlboss is all about the differences between millennial women and Gen Z women when it comes to the workplace. Millennial women were told to hustle, to lean in, to girl boss their way through the tough stuff, whereas Gen Z have a much more relaxed approach to work and a person-first approach to work. They're more interested in having a great life than just a great working life. And I want to understand, what does it mean when those two groups come together in a workplace, as they're starting to now? Flex Mami brings the perspective of someone who's Gen Z. I have admired Flex for a really long time. I love watching her on social media. I love her feel and her approach. I also love the fact she has boundaries. And as a millennial, I find that completely intriguing. I think she really exemplifies this sort of emerging Gen Z culture that says, I want to be able to bring my whole self to work. I want to be able to leave at 5 o'clock. I want to be able to work flexibly. And that's how I come. That's what I'm doing. And you're not going to push me to do more. What if I want to opt out of the rat race? What if I want to do work differently? Why do the structures and the way we set work up to be, where it's now expected for some people to work a 50, 60, 70-hour week, why does work have to define me? What if work's just something that I do sometimes and I exist very separately to it?
We have always had a problem with the fact that we have undervalued the caring professions, because the caring professions are majority done by women, majority doing work that we think women should do for free. Like looking after children, and looking after old people, looking after people when they're sick. And we look at it and we go, yeah, but there are women who've done that since the dawn of time and they didn't need to be paid. But you're asking to be paid? Oh, we'll pay you a little bit. We'll pay you a little bit. But this banker over here, who's an absolutely essential worker, his work's worth so much more. Like, I think a lot of that comes down to the way we value work. And the girl bosses were trying to do man work. And so we value it. But the idea of like rising to the top of the teaching industry involves being a principal and being a boss. You can't be a boss classroom teacher. Why can't we pay the best classroom teachers the most? No, they've got to be a principal. There's a teacher. They've got to become the principal. They've got to be managerial. They've got to run the show.
Well, I mean, that's a really good point, because again, it's like nurses went on strike during the pandemic, right? It happened in various states across the country. And I remember in WA when that happened, the government put this ad in the paper that essentially said, oh, the nurses going on strike are putting people's lives at risk, you know? So came out against their own nurses, against the workers, right? And tried to essentially disparage them. Now, I can put money, wasn't there, didn't hear about it, but I would bet very strongly that the WA government had an International Women's Day breakfast. Ooh. You know?
There were cupcakes.
There were cupcakes. You know, there were cupcakes and platitudes and bromides about success and you can and you can and you can. But on the other side of the coin, they're going against the women, which is, you know, nursing is a predominantly female-driven profession, going against the women who are demanding, nay, deserving of a pay rise. There's this discrepancy that just doesn't sit right with me.
Could one say if we dismantle the boss, we dismantle the girl boss? Girl boss is derivative of what was already there. This feels like we're putting a lot of blame of just the beneficiaries of already a broken system.
All right, Karl Marx.
Let's stop. I've had enough.
Okay,
because was that 3?
Is this what we're doing? We're doing a reading of Das Kapital over here?
This past year has seen an explosion in Iran. When Mahsa Amini, a young Kurdish woman in Iran, was arrested for improperly wearing her hijab and then died in police custody, it lit a match under the Iranian women, and it was led by Iranian women and girls, not just in the Kurdish area, but across the country. The Woman Life Freedom protest movement was born, and it goes on to this day. I was particularly pleased to see Gelareh Pour in this session, not just for her contribution to the discussion, but for the music she played and the song she sang at the end. It's not only a tribute to the Woman Life Freedom movement in Iran, it's also a lament about the particular tragedies that are happening across that country. And it's done through music and poetry plays such an important role in Iranian culture and throughout its history. It connects the people through art and to politics and back to art again.
زن، زندگی، آزادی. Thank you.